This is volume snapshot meeting. At first, I just want to quickly go over the list we have discussed last few meetings, and give kind of an update, the status, the plan. So for the first two, the deletion protection and the we call deletion policy, we should be able to implement those in this quarter. And we start looking at them. And for resource quota, I think this is also quite an important feature that currently we don't have support for resource quota for CRD. And I asked our team who is working on this feature, it probably can be finished in 2 quarters. So that means we most likely can have it in Q1 next year. I will try to this feature and work with our team on it, so we can have a resource quota for snapshot as soon as possible. So for Q1, we have it any issue about timeline for this feature? So seems everyone's okay. We can have it in 2 quarters. For topology aware, to add the snapshot topology, we start working on that, and Xing already have a PR. So we can talk a little bit more detail shortly in this meeting. So last CSI meeting, we already joined and talk about this adding snapshot topology. And for the revert and in-place restore, I'm thinking, so for this quarter, we'll gather some feedback for users who can start using as the snapshot as alpha feature, so that we can get more clear that how we can implement those functionalities, whether they are needed. And yes, so it's not a very urgent feature we need to implement now. So we want to have some feedback about those. And for list, I have heard actually a list snapshots for volumes. Those are probably very useful feature, but again, for this quarter, we want to get some feedback and to see how we can provide those functions. And for a consistent group, a group of snapshots, Xing and I will initiate some discussion on that, and then we can have some initial proposal. And for sharing clone, I think we will coordinate with others who is working on clone features, so we can see how we can provide a consistent way to provide those. Any questions for the list? So I add a couple more, so we can discuss today after the topology. We can look at the topology PR. So Xing, you want to talk about the PR you have on topology?
Yeah, sure.
So I need to share your screen, or you can just...
I can share it, I think.
I pause share now.
Oh, I cannot share. Okay, yeah, looks like only one person can share.
I already paused mine.
Okay.
Can you share now?
And it still says the other.
Okay, I stop share.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we talked about this at the last CSI meeting. So basically, the first thing we want to add is a plugin capability for Snapshot. So here we added a Snapshot accessibility constraints for Snapshot, and then we renamed this one. We added volume here. So now we have two accessibility constraints, one for volume, one for Snapshot. That's that.
Yeah, the reason we have these two separate ones, like because we're thinking for volume plugin, it's possible that they only have one. It's possible they only have one capability. For example, the volume don't have any topology constraint, but Snapshot has, or the other way, like the volume have topology constraints, but the Snapshot has no topology at all. So in this case, we want to separate the constraints, yeah, the capabilities, so that, for example, if we only have one, and when the CSI these constraints, the controller will ask, okay, whether you have this topology constraints, and then it answers yes, and then they will consume like both snapshot and the volume has the capabilities, but actually some of one of them might not have the capability. Okay, yeah, just to explain why we have two, yeah, instead of a general one.
I mean, at a high level, like snapshots cannot be connected to nodes.
Your voice is very low.
Oh man. Sorry, I'm using a different setup. Is that any better?
I can't hear whoever that is. I think it's Ben, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's Ben. Just a very. It's like from a distance.
It's like a little mouse. Squeak, squeak,
Is
squeak.
this any better?
Nope.
All right, go on, and I'll try to fix my audio.
I think it's kind of okay.
You can go ahead. It just seems like you're talking at a very remote location or something, but we can hear you.
Okay, well, sorry, I don't know what's wrong with this headset. My basic question is, because snapshots can't be connected to nodes, why does accessibility matter? All you can do is create volumes from them. So there's no relationship to nodes.
Yeah, this is for the upload part only. So if after the snapshot is cut, if you want to upload it to some location, then that could be a different location. So that's why that's why we added this. It's not the same as if you just take a snapshot on the same block device, then that's probably fine.
Right.
But this is the upload part.
So for some cloud provider, like a snapshot could be uploaded to some location. So in some certain zone or certain region, and so we should also have topology support for snapshot. Does this answer your question?
Well, I guess it means there's something I don't understand. I don't understand what uploading is in the context of CSI, but
because we already have.
Try to figure that out.
Okay, yeah, because really, even in the current spec, if you look at the pre-snapshot, right, we talked about there are two phases, right? The first phase is the snapshot is cut, and then second phase is uploading. But not every storage system will do the uploading. Right now, it's only the cloud providers, right? Like Google Cloud, AWS, right? They will upload the snapshot in the same create snapshot process, going to be uploaded somewhere.
Does the CSI client ever become aware of those details?
Well, that's why we have this topology. Then we do have something in the design, right? So that's why we we were discussing about in the status and how to, how to tell CO it is done, right? We talked about that for a long time just because of this, right? Because we have those two phases.
Yeah, but my understanding was it was just it's uploading somewhere, and
Right.
that's all the end user needs to know. And so now you're saying, well, maybe where it's uploading actually matters to the end user, but they still don't have any control over where it uploads to. They just say, I wanted a snapshot, and the system said, okay, I'm making you a snapshot.
So
the user can choose, for example, I think AWS, like you can choose where which zone you want to upload. You can pick. And right now, GC, for example, it's doesn't matter because it's global, but yeah, it might change too. So
and is that where you want to upload exposed through CSI?
Yes, so through the topology, right? So you can specify your requirement.
Okay.
So your topology requirement
so
is.
So you're saying that the topology is the way that you specify where you want it to go.
Right.
Okay. That was the part I was missing. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Okay. So we move on to the next. So this is just some naming change because we modified the accessibility constraints that was defined for volume only before. So now we added the volume in front of it. So similarly, for volume message, that's from the create volume response. So just added that, added the volume in front of the accessibility constraints. This is the topology requirements. Basically, just making changes to the definition so that considers snapshot as well. Yeah, so basically, it's just every where it says volume, I also added a snapshot in there. I think maybe it make more sense if I just go to the create snapshot request, because that one just, so okay, create snapshot request. So here we added a topology requirement here, specifies where the snapshot must be accessible from. So here you can specify the regions, zones, those type of information. So of course the plugin needs to report that snapshot accessibility constraints, and then we can look at this topology requirement. So in the create snapshot response, we also added a topology here. Basically, that's after the snapshot is provisioned. So this field tells us, well, we can have access to the snapshot from which region, which zone. So and then let's go look at the. This is a very long description of the topology requirements and topology. So basically, it's going to be very similar for snapshots. So this has two fields. One is the requisite. The other one is preferred. Basically, the CO will be looking at this two, and then based on whether the node is accessible to some zones, some regions, and then decide where to place the workload. So does anyone have any questions on this?
And so when you say accessible, you're referring to the ability to create a volume and attach a volume in some region from the snapshot.
Yeah, that's the volume, right? That's the volume part, right? The snapshots.
When I think about snapshots and locality, the thing that's in the tip of my mind is I might want my snapshot in more than one place because I'm using it as my disaster protection scheme, right? I might be worried about an entire site being lost, and so I need to make sure my snapshot is in at least 2 places so that I don't lose my data. And that's not an accessibility concern. That's more of a redundancy concern. But it sounds like you could achieve it with this mechanism.
Right. This one, actually, with this one, you can specify you want it to be multiple zones. Then you can specify multiples, right?
So I guess I'm wondering, is accessibility the right word to use? Because it's more than accessible in the zones. If the implication is it should actually exist in both of the zones as redundant copies, that's a different thing to say than you can access it from either of these zones, right?
Oh, so you are more like thinking if we specify this, and so that underlying driver can, let's say, make multiple copies of snapshots, but based on this requirement, let's say it would.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the way it's written is.
So Ben, I think I could clarify that. This terminology and this whole mechanism is essentially what we defined for volumes to begin with. I completely understand your argument for replication, but the reason we went with accessibility is because ultimately it's about being able to consume the volume or the snapshot. It may be that it was replicated in 2 places, but ultimately the behavior is that it's accessible from these 2 places. And the way that we actually express the replication is through an opaque parameter. So if the snapshot or the volume are capable of replication, you'll have an opaque parameter that says, turn replication on. And then these parameters are used in conjunction with that to say, I want it to be replicated to these 2, racks, regions, zones, whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is there a scenario where someone who wants their data to be replicated and makes the right request doesn't get what they want? So that the system says, yeah, your data is in these 2 places, but then one of those places goes down and it's like, oops.
Right. I believe most systems are not going to allow accessibility without replication. So if you, for example, try to specify multiple zones and you don't turn on replication, then your volume is going to be accessible from a single zone, or the same thing with the snapshot. And the snapshot or volume object that you get back tell you which zones or topology segments it's accessible from. So you're going to see when you get the response that, oh, I can actually only access this from one. It's not until you provide that opaque parameter to say, hey, I'm turning on replication, that the storage system says, oh, you want a volume or a snapshot that's replicated. Therefore, let me take 2 of these required topologies that you specified and pick from, select 2 to replicate from.
Yeah, but I'm worried about the case where you have a backend that says, well, it's accessible from all of the regions because I have my networking set up such that I can beam the data where it needs to be when you want it to be there. But I'm only going to keep 1 copy because it's wasteful to have 2 or 3 or 4 copies. And so you can blur you can say, well, if all accessible means is that you can use it in that place, data doesn't actually have to be there to meet that requirement. And so someone could potentially get away with saying, yes, it's accessible in all of your regions or all the regions you asked for. But then, in fact, if the region goes away that happens to have your data, then all of a sudden it's not accessible in any region.
Yeah, I think that risk exists. The number of storage systems that I've seen do that is very low. I think it's, the fact that this is already part of the API already, I think consistency is better than trying to optimize around that. And
well, yeah, I'm just trying to think through if this becomes like a foundational layer for people to implement a real replication scheme, then we kind of need to be careful about what we promise and what we don't promise with the contract. You know?
yeah, and actually, I think accessibility is what we want. I would rather that we leave these as two separate concepts, rather than have enforce a concept of you can only be accessible from two areas if you do replication.
Okay. Yes. I agree with that. I think there's another concept, and I want to make sure that we're explicit about saying we're not promising
Replication. Yeah, that's a good point. I think maybe what we could do is add comments to that effect.
Yeah, so we actually have some comments here talking about that. So if those two are together, right? So if it actually talks about an opaque parameter in create volume request. If that says, okay, this volume is replicated, it's accessible from two zones. And then based on that, then the volume or snapshot should be accessible from two zones. So here is one place that I see that this one is already applications being mentioned here.
Yeah, it's a little bit
accessible from two zones doesn't mean that you actually have a copy of it in both of the zones.
right.
Yeah, so there is a.
Mean that, but we're not promising that.
No, it's not actually. So this one is if you read the comment.
Read that comment right there, 522 to 525. I think that captures it well.
Yeah, so I think the comments here are actually very, very detailed, talking about, if you cannot satisfy this, what you should do. So there are actually a lot of comments on that. If you request this, but you can only do so much, whether you should fail or not. So I think a lot of details in the comments.
Right.
So to be clear, the specification does not require replication, and that is on purpose. We want to leave it open to let the storage system define whether they want to do accessibility via replication or through some sort of network setup or through some other setup. And the way that the user discovers what is accessible or not is through the object that's returned. It gets marked. And the way that they request replication is through an opaque parameter. Yes, I agree that there is possibly a way to, if your storage system supports both replication and a volume that can be accessible from two separate topologies, you could have confusion in terms of, I specified two different zones but didn't turn on replication. In reality, I think those systems aren't very common, at least the ones that we've looked at. And I think this actually goes back to something somebody was requesting on the CSI call last week, which was the concept of using topology as aligned with network topology. I think the use case was they wanted to have nodes that were belong to two different networks at once. And we had offline discussions about that. And I think what we're leaning towards is we're probably not going to support separate networks for a given cluster through this topology mechanism, or at least not go out of our way to try and support that. But we can discuss that more in the CSI call, I think.
So in this spec, should we clarify that we do not require replication? Because it looks like people are confused.
I think let's have folks actually read through the PR and read over the comments and see if there is confusion. If there is, yes, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I see there is, let's say 507 mentioned synchronously replicated. Yeah, maybe we can read through those comments and if necessary, we clarify.
And there's a question from Andrew in the chat. His question is, the question is whether the specification requires replication, and if it doesn't, how do you request it? So the specification does not require replication. And if it doesn't, how do you request it? So you request it through an opaque parameter. All the create operations in CSI have a key value pair of opaque parameters, which are defined by the volume plugin. So if a volume plugin happens to support, for example, replication on either snapshot or volume, they would expose a replication parameter on as an opaque parameter in the create snapshot and create volume calls. Second part of his comment is, it sounds like accessibility and replication should be completely orthogonal issues. Yes, agreed. So out of the scope then. Yes, accessibility, replication should be out of scope because essentially the CO doesn't really need to be aware of the fact that this thing is replicated under the covers yet. And accessibility does need to be part of the spec because the CO needs to take actions based on the fact that it is actually accessible from multiple locations. So for example, in order to do scheduling. I think an argument can be made that multi-accessibility versus replication could result in different types of scheduling requirements. And if that is the case, then we could potentially add some sort of replication parameter or indicator into the volume response, the snapshot response objects. But so far, I haven't seen a concrete use case for that. And I would prefer to start with a minimal API and add things to it rather than go the other way.
Well, I agree with everything you said. I just wanted to point out that my specific concern is that if replication is done in an opaque way, and this is like part of the standard,
yep,
some people might discover that at least on their implementation, if they use this mechanism, they get replication, and they might start thinking that's the right way to get replication.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that risk exists, and I think it's just something that we're going to go forward with. And if it results in a larger issue, then we can add to what we have instead of trying to prevent an issue that might not exist.
Yeah, I agree. So also maybe the comments can't make it more kind of explicit. So explain like this is accessibility, not purpose for the purpose of replication. So we can also discuss this a little bit more in detail in CSI meeting. So
and one more comment from Andrew in the chat is the comments imply that behavior. I think we should be explicit that it isn't guaranteed. So I agree with that. If there is an implication, we should be clear about that it's not required. And feel free to comment specifically in the PR if there's a comment or anything that is unclear, and we can take it from there.
Right, and also things, this topology is not, it's for both volume and the snapshot. I think yeah, it's also good. We can, after we see the feedback, and we can discuss in CSI meeting too, yeah. So it's good. So we want to like make more things more clear. We can have to follow up on this.
Okay, so should I add something here saying topology does not?
I would like to see folks who
wait.
are raising the concerns actually recommend the wording if possible.
Okay, yeah.
That way we can get closer to what I think. I'd like to see exactly what the concerns are, and that way we can probably get closer to a resolution than trying to guess what people are looking for.
Okay, sounds good.
So if you have concerns on this PR, please take a look, provide comments, and we can go from there.
So for snapshots part, I think that's most.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, that's it. I think it's better to go through the PR and look at some details and then add comments here, then we can address it. That'll be great.
Okay, thank you. So can I share the screen back again? Do you have anything else, Jing?
No, I'm all set.
Okay.
I stopped sharing.
All right, folks, thank you very much. And,
sorry, I haven't finished.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just looking. I kind of could not find the share button.
Nope, go for it. Sorry about that.
No problem. So, okay, you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Okay, so besides the list we discussed so far, I think one more thing we want to add to the list is for the snapshot preparation. It's might not like a must feature, but I want to discuss a little bit to see to gather some feedback. So I think we discussed a little bit before related to this. So right now in our API we don't have any like support for prepare application before taking snapshot. That means we need to let user know it's not the consistency snapshot we support, right? If they are taking snapshot, you might not get data consistency. So user must prepare the application manually, like before taking the snapshot. They can either pause their application and also even like freeze the file system, or to be the safest way is unmount file system in some cases. And then they can issue the take snapshots through our API. And it's also like possible we can have some support. For example, we can have the controller to take care of, let's say, file system freeze before taking snapshot, and also add some hook for application freeze. So things right now, the application is running in container like through our pod. So Kubernetes is responsible for the life cycle of the application, the pod. So in order to provide such hook, then Kubernetes can watch that hook need to be like specified in the pod spec, and Kubernetes can responsible for execute some command before to prepare application before taking snapshots. And it's definitely not an easy task to like provide such supports. So I want to see the general idea, like whether we should think about providing those, or it's definitely not it's even not necessary. So the benefits I can see so far is basically it can automate the process, like to minimize the human intervention and also improve some efficiency. So since the system the controller can see, okay, freeze file system and then immediately take snapshot.
So I think this is definitely a requirement for the feature to go GA. If we're ever going to get to a point where we're going to be able to take application consistent snapshots, we're going to need to have some sort of hook into the application. The challenges are, all the things that you mentioned. One more thing to keep in mind as we design this is that the feedback that we have from SIG architecture is to ensure that the way that we do this has to be generic enough so that it can be reused for potentially other types of features and other lifecycle hooks. So it's not specific just to snapshots. Otherwise, we're going to get pushback from API reviewers. But overall, my feedback is that this is something that we really need before GA. So worth starting to think about how we're going to do it.
Okay, yeah. So
my concern with these kinds of features, can you guys still hear me? I hope.
yeah, sure.
Yes.
One of the big challenges with these kinds of file system freezing things is controlling of the timing, like how long is it frozen for, how does it time out? How do you make sure that it's frozen for the shortest amount of time? Something that we had I think it was in the regular CSI meeting, the general discussion about deadlines and snapshots and how long you have to take them. It gets even worse here because now, your application is actually halted for, until the snapshot gets taken. And so you got to have a way to put a time bound on it. So if for whatever reason the snapshot can't get taken, you remember to unfreeze and fail the whole operation and continue going on. And Kubernetes seems relatively poorly suited to doing things in a time-bounded way. So it makes me nervous.
Yes, so I think the API we define for snapshots, right now we do consider this timing. So we have a ready, this is not the ready, actually the create time. So when snapshot is cut, we put a create time. That's when indicate, okay, the application can be resumed. So controller should be able to detect, okay, when the application can be resumed. And if you create snapshots fail, then we have an arrow. So the arrow state will specify, okay, you failed to create snapshots. Then that also indicate, okay, you should resume your application since your snapshot creation fails.
Yeah, but it's worse than that. Like as the user of the application, I might say I'm willing to halt my application for up to 30 seconds to take a consistent snapshot. But if for whatever reason it's going to take longer than 30 seconds, I'm going to give up and let my application start running again. So the users don't get upset on the other end. And so you need a mechanism to say, well, the snapshot is happening. It's just going too slow. So I need to abort and get my application up and running because I'm not willing to wait for however long it's going to take.
Yes.
Yeah, I think part of whatever this lifecycle hook is going to be is we're going to have to define what that period of time is, whether it's fixed or static, or it's something that's negotiated. And if it's negotiated, is it negotiated between application and storage system and Kubernetes? What are the players involved? How do we do that? So I think all of that needs to be thought through. But the natural evolution of this feature is that if we want to get to a point where we're going to be able to take application consistent snapshots, we need to be able to have some sort of hook into the application. It's not going to work without it. But I completely agree with the challenges that you laid out. We'll have to think through those.
Right, there are a lot of changes. And also since multiple pods can use volume, right, we have to basically prepare multiple pods at the same time. And then, prepare them and unfreeze them. Those kind of consistency issue. Right now, we already have like two kinds of timing. For one is for create snapshot. We also mentioned for create snapshot, we can have kind of a the period time you are waiting to trying to take a snapshot, right? We haven't added that feature yet. And then for application, yeah.
And assuming we get the timing thing right, so you can say, I'm only willing to freeze my application for X amount of time, and then the snapshot, you figure out when it was taken. You need to be able to, at the end of it, determine, did the snapshot get taken before the application unfroze?
Yep.
Yeah, there are also, remember, we have some readiness feature we mentioned before. So this might also use this readiness. So whether, let's say, when one part is ready and the other part can go ahead. Yeah. There are lots of complicated.
I think the underlying concern that Ben is raising is around if we have a time-bounded, and I think this has come up in this call in previous meetings as well. If we time-bound how long a snapshot can take, in the previous context, this was discussed in the context of retries. What happens if the snapshot taking process is taking a long time, but it's still in process, but it's beyond the deadline? What do we do? And right. I think it's worth thinking through how we define that in the CSI spec. Maybe we can, because these calls are supposed to be synchronous, the termination of the connection from the caller side should be an indication to the to the storage system, and this is just me kind of throwing out ideas.
Yes.
It could be an indication that, hey, I give up. I requested this snapshot, but you took too long, so do whatever you need to do to clean it up. I don't need it anymore.
All right. So right now, one kind of thing is we don't have any cancel operation. And so in that case, we time out, but we don't know what happened underlying. Like,
yeah, maybe we should make that explicit in the spec that if a timeout happens, but the problem is the spec says these calls are supposed to be idempotent, and I believe create snapshot also says that. So then ultimately the caller would be responsible for doing the cleanup. Regardless, I think it's worth taking a note and thinking through these and see how we can clarify the spec and what can be added to handle this. I think all of this will need to go in before GA.
okay, sure. So we'll think through all these things, and especially like for CSI spec. So whether we need some special also explain in more detail. So that's a good discussion. So that's what I have so far. So I think for next time, we will like discuss a bit more in detail. So since it's not required properly for this quarter, but it's definitely worth to start the discussion as early as possible, the required big changes in Snapshot and also maybe in CSI spec. Yeah. Any other issues anyone want to discuss? Okay, great. Thank you very much again, and we still have some time left. So see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.